further on the legislation before. Senator Fazio, good afternoon again.
Good afternoon, Madam President, once again. I'm disappointed that the amendment failed. I think it would have provided relief to car owners and an improvement in the overall tax structure in the state of Connecticut, a reduction in the overall burden for the regular Connecticut residents. Now, I do want to move on to another topic because the special session was generally sold to the public as a necessary session in order to fix technical problems with our municipal car taxation system. And even us in the minority party submitted that we did need to have a special session to fix specifically some of the mistakes in current statute related to the taxation of commercial vehicles. That's what we've talked about for months. There's been other topics of conversation where there was that were entertained as subject matters for the special session as well. Some of those were rejected, like the House environmental proposals that had been debated over many months. Others have also received a public hearing that are a part of this legislation in particular, including changes to historic preservation and development regulations, among others. I think it is reasonable to include in a special session minor fixes, issues that have been subject to public debate and discussion for a long period of time, and all the vetting that entails, which is valuable to us as legislators. The public hearing process, the process for public debate, the committee process are necessary parts of the legislative process which shed light on complex topics that are serious and have consequence in the lives of 3.6 million citizens across the state, all of our constituents. That process of transparency and open debate and deliberation still matters in our democracy. It still matters in the state of Connecticut. Now, we have an 140-page bill in front of us, piece of legislation here in front of us. The predominant sections in this bill relate to the acquisition of a public utility and significant changes to policy regarding acquisition of assets of a public utility, specifically the Aquarian Water Company's assets in Connecticut. That's 50 pages out of 130 or 140 in this legislation today. I'm the ranking member of the Energy and Technology Committee, which is the committee of cognizance over those types of regulatory matters in the legislature. I heard about this proposal a couple of days ago in the Mirror, in a newspaper. We work very well across the aisle on the Energy and Technology Committee. We work, I think, very well across many committees in a bipartisan fashion. Most of the issues we deal with are solving problems. They're not necessarily ideological disputes or partisan disputes, but they're actual problem solving. And most of them we can find compromises to make policy a little bit better. And I'm sure that on this topic, the open question of what Eversource, which is the parent company of Aquarian Water Company, will do with the assets that it owns in Connecticut, we could find policies that will lead to better outcomes for residents, for ratepayers, safe, affordable water supply for all of Connecticut residents. And I know that if we had the opportunity to address that issue in an open manner in the normal legislative process, the committee process, the public input process, and so on, and all the deliberations that entails for complex topics, that we'd be able to come up with a policy that works for everyone on utilities issues specifically related to these water assets that are predominantly concentrated in Fairfield County, including in my district. I know that the chairman of that committee, the ranking members of the committee, that all the members on both sides of the aisle committee could have worked well together if they were given the opportunity. And I am here to suggest very clearly that both members of the majority and the minority on the Energy and Technology Committee were not given the opportunity to provide input to this policy, these 50 pages of policy that we have before us today. In summary, what this will allow is for the Regional Water Authority, a public water utility in Connecticut, around New Haven County it's concentrated, to change its charter to expand and potentially purchase the assets of the Aquarian Water Company, which are assets mostly concentrated in Fairfield County. But the Aquarian Water Company is a substantial enterprise. It's $1.2 billion of revenue, according to reports that we've read. This would represent a substantial expansion of the Regional Water Authority's operations and substantial effects, potentially positive, but potentially very negative, for both the hundreds of thousands of water customers in the Regional Water Authority and the hundreds of thousands of customers that Aquarian has across Connecticut as well. 50-page policy change worth over $1 billion potentially in revenue per year, affecting hundreds of thousands of customers in Connecticut, and nobody heard about it publicly until a few days ago. And we're going to vote up or down on this policy. It flies in the face of all the principles of openness and transparency and public debate and democracy that we know are so important in this state. And there might have been a right answer here that we all could have gotten behind. But if the legislators weren't consulted, if the public wasn't consulted, how can we expect to maximize the likelihood that we have a good policy outcome at all? Again, the news report said it themselves. Not only the public was not consulted, but the legislators weren't consulted. I believe the legislators on both sides of the aisle were not consulted, and yet we have before us a piece of legislation that could have billions of dollars of effect per year on Connecticut residents, on people paying their water bills here in Connecticut. Here's one way, potentially. According to analysis from the Office of Consumer Counsel, which is doing good work in just a few days' time on a topic that apparently most of the state government, including the various agencies, didn't know about for very long. According to a good analysis, interesting analysis from the Office of Consumer Counsel, which themselves said that they don't take a position on the policy, partially because we didn't have enough time to fully analyze it, but they've done very good analysis, and part of their analysis looks at the average water bills of similar customers, similar systems and households in the different jurisdictions under the different water companies across Connecticut. In the Western Division of Aquarion, which is the Stamford area, which is part of my district, the average monthly bill for a water customer using 8,000 gallons a month is $39.78. The average monthly bill for the same type of customer in the Regional Water Authority is $62.17. That's not a trivial difference. It's a difference of over 50%. The Regional Water Authority customers are paying over 50% more than the Aquarion customers in the Stamford region, which includes my district. If all the assets go under one entity, there is a high degree of likelihood that there would be an equalization of rates. Maybe they go to complete equality on rates. Maybe water customers in Greenwich or Stamford or New Canaan or Bridgeport are suddenly going to see their water rates increase, their water bills increase by over 50%. A $22.40 increase on the average water bill for an Aquarian customer would mean a $270 increase in water bills paid by those residents every single year. That could happen if we have an equalization of rates. I don't understand why you wouldn't for a similar customer going under a different corporate structure. I mean, we don't know exactly what the economic effects and costs that could be imposed on residents will be. What we do know is that they could be substantial. Billions of dollars of costs potentially faced by residents whose own representatives had no idea about the policy change until just 3 days ago when an enterprising reporter was able to break the story. This stinks. This stinks. It might be the right policy. I just don't know yet. We've had 2 days to analyze 50 pages of policy change, which have an economic effect of billions of dollars without any sort of substantial input from experts, from the agencies, from the regulators. Maybe there's minor changes that could be made that would protect consumers, but guess what? That's exactly what the legislative process is for. That's exactly what the public hearing process is for and the committee process is for. It still works. It might be hundreds of years old, but it still works, and it should still be employed. And compromise and discussion and debate, they still work in Connecticut and in the United States, and they should not be abandoned, regardless of the pretense. Many of the changes in this, what is become an omnibus piece of legislation, 130 pages covering a lot of different topics, yes, we disagree with them, but they've been heard before. They've been debated before. And I think I'm pretty demure on the floor normally when discussing disagreements, because these are difficult topics to discuss and they're difficult topics to evaluate. And I don't even know that I agree with myself most of the time. But I do know that there is a process. There is a process that occurs and is designed specifically because it improves the outcomes that we have. It takes good ideas, it tries to suss out bad ideas and make policy as good as possible in an imperfect world with very difficult decisions and trade-offs at stake. This is an area where there are difficult decisions that need to be made. It's more complicated than anything else in the bill. Right? Billions of dollars of major infrastructure, public utilities policy being made on a whim without anyone knowing before 3 days ago in a news article. I mean, come on. And the downstream consequences is a senior citizen on a fixed income or a working mom or dad with a lower middle income in Lower Fairfield County, where the cost of living is already too damn high, going to have to pay hundreds of dollars more in their water bills every single year with this change passed without any public input or debate beyond these couple of hours that we've had. We only got this final piece of legislation a couple hours ago, and here we are having to vote on it. Billions of dollars of decisions in a small state being made with just hours notice ahead of time. Madam President, the clerk is in possession of an amendment, LCO number 6218. I would ask the clerk to kindly call the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 6218, Senate Amendment B.
Thank you, Senator Fazio.
I would like to ask permission to summarize the amendment.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam President and Mr. Clerk. The amendment's pretty simple. It just asks to strike these sections of the legislation so that we can go back to the drawing board, have input of all the constituent parties that we need, and some time to deliberate and come back with a fully vetted policy. It simply strikes the utilities regulations from the legislation. It reads, strike sections 34 to 32 inclusive in their entirety and renumber the remaining sections and internal references accordingly. I would ask for a roll call vote eventually when the amendment is called, and I know that other colleagues of mine will like to give their input. I don't want to trivialize the issue. There is water assets, utilities assets that an investor-owned utility wants to sell in Connecticut for whatever reason, and it's reasonable that there are a certain number of people allowed to bid on the process, and I'm open to the notion that maybe the Regional Water Authority should be one of those bidders for those assets. I just don't know how we can expect policymakers to vote on something that we just heard about 3 days ago that will have billions of dollars of economic effects on the state. We can actually help. We can help design a policy and hopefully lead to policy outcomes for Connecticut ratepayers that are more affordable while having reliable and quality service. But you need to listen to everybody. You need to go through a regular kind of open debate and vetting process. It shouldn't be given to legislators 72 hours or a few hours in its final form ahead of time and expect that we're going to have a good outcome from it. Maybe this doesn't even need to be a formal committee process or a formal public hearing process. Maybe there could be informational forums in the off season to discuss the item, and then from there you go into a special session to deal with it. Or maybe we just have it out in the public so that we can discuss it and debate it informally and people know about its existence before they have to vote on it. And there's different opinions that are able to kind of go against each other in the public space. What I do know for sure is that this is not the way to do it. This stinks. This is a major multi-billion-dollar policy change for Connecticut residents that they'll have to pay in their water bills, for better or for worse. It was not given any public vetting, any major public debate or analysis, and so I submit to you that no one knows what the consequences of what we're voting on will be. Therefore, I urge my colleagues in a roll call vote to vote for this amendment so we can go back to the drawing board and embrace the transparency and public debate and good policy making that we all know is the way to go in Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you. Will you remark further?